Hello and welcome to the review of the day. This review is for The Claw by Terence Haile. There's a lot to unpack here. There really is. Okay, let me start with how I came to have this book in the first place. It was part of my immense November book haul. At that stage, the store had a lot of excess books, and I went up and I made the proposition that if I bought over 100 books, could I get them at $1 each? Luckily, they said yes. So I went berserk. I bought something like 170 books, mostly science fiction, not all. And you get slap happy and you're just grabbing armfuls. I was doing that. And one of them was The Claw. Now, I picked this book off the shelf, and anyone who routinely shops second-hand shops is going to know that thing where you pick up a book and you're intrigued and you know nothing, but you're kind of interested and you're absorbed in it. That was this one. It's a very thin paperback. It's obviously been read a fair bit. It's in poor condition. I'm going to say that two things that really attracted it to me were the fact that I knew nothing about it. I didn't recognize the name. I didn't recognize the author. I didn't recognize the publisher, Beb. And I really liked that cover art. So it used to be never judge a book by the cover, right? Which is exactly not what cover art is meant to be. Cover art is meant to make you judge what you're going to get inside. And I'm loving this trend, especially I think it's mostly due to people who like mass market, produce sci-fi books, and who are relishing the cover art. And I'm going to credit BookTube with a lot of that, because so many of us actually love the cover art for what it is. I love this cover art. I think, being how this is an old book, this must have been painted by someone real, I imagine, like on a canvas. It's subtle. The true subtlety of the background doesn't really come up. Now, when I first saw this, for the longest time, I thought of this as a lake with a structure, and yes, it is a bit phallic, but we won't talk about that, reflected in the lake and the sky above. Since reading it, I realized that's meant to be a kind of train rocket ship thing, and this smudgy stuff here is the smoke or the exhaust or something. The subtlety of the background color is still really amazing. I hope that the painting that this was based on is actually being relished by someone out there. It seems unlikely given the quality of the book, but maybe. Anyway, so Beb stands for Bill Ewington Books, of which I'd never heard. Bill Ewington Books is based in Surrey Street, Sydney, New South Wales. That's Australia. And it's printed in Australia by the Griffin Press in South Australia. There are no ISBNs anywhere on this work, and there's no copyright either. So ISBN isn't legally required, but I think the fact that there isn't one here places it as 70s at the very latest. Other things about it make me think it's earlier than that even. 80 cents, and you can't see that underneath. It says something or other retail price 80 cents. Actually, I guess that dates it to after we went away from pounds and shillings. I don't know. I find it very, very hard to date this book. The lack of copyright, I feel, might be because it is a truly terrible book, and perhaps the publishers knew perfectly well that there was going to be no need to copyright it. It is a truly terrible book. When I went online to try and discover something about Terence Haile, I couldn't find a lot, and apparently no one else could either, because Sci-Fi Stack Exchange posted a question years ago looking for biographical information about Terence Haile, the author of the science fiction book The Space Train. It's a very bad book, but we are trying to clear the copyright to turn it into an ebook nonetheless. I don't know if they succeeded. If they did, I expect it will be a hysterically funny ebook. Because, oh my god, is this dated. Oh my, yeah, so dated. So, throughout the book, I kept coming back to how old it was. It was really the language is really dated. It is out of control dated. For example, let me choose an example or two. There was no doubt that his mother had something he knew. He was becoming a kind of social outcast in his obsession with work. It was months since he saw anyone apart from his mother and a farm labourer. It would be pleasant to dodge over to the small town and enjoy an hour's dancing. That's probably not the best example, but it is routinely dated. And as you get further into it, there's things like women in it. I mean, women in books are always going to be dated to the era in which it was written. I still don't know what this was. Television is not mentioned throughout the book until there's one glancing reference of it on page 148. But up until then, people were listening to gramophones and radios. There's no real mention of any world wars. I assume it would have to be after the First World War, because the author was born in 1921, allegedly. Apparently he had 5 books according to Goodreads, westerns and sci-fi. The Claw is one of 5 that the Goodreads shows. One of them is Galaxies Ahead. Another one's Trails End. There's a book called Space Train. It's a bit hard to tell, but I think that might actually be the same book as The Claw, and just nobody's really sure about it. So terribly dated. The writing is bad. I'm afraid it's bad. For the first 100 pages, it was bad and funny. After that, it was bad and being skim-read because I just couldn't bear so much of it. In Terry Pratchett's Monstrous Regiment, there's a character, Captain Blouse, who is described as a person who puts punctuation marks around everything that he finds slightly racy. At the time, I thought that's a great way of defining a character. You know what? Terry Pratchett was writing about a real trend, not an invented person. This book has punctuation marks gone wild. Wild. Free orbit. Conference. Kidnapped. Mist. Why do you need punctuation marks around mist? It's a mist. Mist, word, English. Punctuation marks? No, not needed. And this guy was from the UK. You'd think that English would be something he'd good at. Oh, someone blacked out. What? What? Yeah, so there's so much about this that is weird. One of the things they're playing on the gramophone is Jelly Roll Morton. I seem to remember hearing that band or singer or whatever it is in another really old book. So I'm thinking maybe it can't be a 30s if he was born in 21. So maybe 40s, maybe 50s. The era feels like 50s. The treatment of women feels like 50s. You've got Alice. Characters, cardboard cutout. You've got Mike. You've got Mike's mum. You've got Alice, the girl Mike is in love with. Alice is defined as plucky and not directly defined, but described in such a way that you think that she's meant to be seen as independent and headstrong by going to a dance on her own, and all these other things that are a little bit naff. But compared with that, we've got, where was it? There is a point where, oh yes, page 107, this was classic. Alice's father, who is also the guy that Mike is trying to get a deal with, says on page 107, "With your feminine logic." Ooh, ow. And with her feminine logic and her independent thinking, she's still allowed to make food and make up beds for the men. Mike's mum only ever makes tea. There's a lot of tea. Lots of tea is made and presumably drunk. So as well as the front, the thing that got me to buy The Claw, what fearful creatures lurked in outer space? Could they believe their eyes? Were those huge claws clawing? Creatures really gargantuan. Crabs. So outer space crabs, it sounds great, doesn't it? And perhaps it would be. We've got 160 pages, and there's probably about 2 pages of the giant crabs from outer space, and all of the rest is Mike, who's inventing this incredibly fast rocket train ship in the barn at home. He's had to come home to tend the farm because his father's died, so him and his mum are living on this farm and cleaning out the pigs, which is what you get for the most part of the first book. But then he invents this thing, which is a rocket train. I did write down the entirety of the details. Comes to the fact that this train can go faster than 3,000 miles per hour. It needs to go on normal train rails, and it is kept on the track by magnetic stabilizers. That's about all the science you get. Eventually there's an accident. The train is fired off into outer space, where the magnificence of its design, having been built in a barn shed by a farm boy, is such that it withstands out of space. They don't run out of oxygen because they've got a handy oxygen cylinder there. They encounter the crabs from outer space, which are a space creature colony. Would this concept have survived the 1970s? I'm not sure. Anyway, they seem to have been caught in the web, and the crabs are surrounding the train. Then the train is sucked back down to the earth tracks near Birmingham, where they left from, because the magnetism pulled them back from outer space. Yeah. And I'm not going to science shame an old book for getting it wrong. And I'm not really going to trash talk a book for being weird about its scientific speculative fiction, but I am going to blame a book for having 160 pages, promising me science and science fiction, and giving me 10 pages worth of that, but another 50 pages of Mike's mum making tea, and Mike inventing reasons for Alice to think he doesn't really love her. I could deal with that sort of thing. I think one of the very few reviews about this book that I found talked about it being in the style of H.G. Wells. I think it was H.G. Wells. And you can get away with that purely on the basis that there's a speculative fiction element, but it's mostly English men poncing around talking at you. Unfortunately, the difference is that Wells wrote beautifully, and guys talking at each other was actually interesting to read. Terence Haile did not write beautifully, and people talking was clumsy and very, very regrettable. So he regretted the remark as soon as it left his lips, but it was too late. She left him with her pretty nose upturned, and unknown to him, her lower lip trembling. How does a lower lip tremble? It looks more like Hellraiser than it does what this is meant to look like. Anyway, it looked like the end of what Mike had hoped would be something more than just a casual friendship. He was very, very fond of her, but what could he do? So that's most of those 160 pages, with very, very minor amounts of space trains and magnetism and all the rest. It's just really quite terrible. On page 155, we suddenly have a bizarre conspiracy plot that we hear about and then vanishes in 2 pages. Basically, Mike and Mike's mum hired this guy who was a tramp to help them work on the farm, and he ends up being a nuclear scientist, I think it was, who doesn't like the nuclear science and has become an honourable tramp. And they send a letter off to this referee that he gives, and they get the answer back. In fact, the biggest science fiction in this is that Mike and Mike's mum can send off this letter to someone one day, and by the next day, less than 24 hours later, they already have the reply. Surely that's science fiction in any era. Except for email, maybe. Even email. director of the organizations don't answer your email in like 5 minutes. If you're some random no one's heard of. Anyway, Mike invents this incredible rocket ship that can go at 3,000 miles per hour. There's a lot of argy-bargy about him, and Alice's father is a local manufacturer of tractors who needs to get his tractors somewhere fast, so he invests in the train, and then Mike and Mike's mum hire this tramp, and then members of Parliament are somehow interested because of Alice's father, who's a big man in the tractor community, and they run it and goes into outer space for like 5 pages and then comes back. Conspiracy theory on the part of the tramp, done and dusted in 2 pages, and then we can have more wonderful narrative of Mike and Alice being in love with each other very clumsily. Seriously, if you read Twilight and thought the romance was bad, worse. If you read ACOTAR and thought you had never found a less believable protagonist and protagonist's love, hello the claw. It is so terrible that I actually quite enjoyed it. I did have to reread. I did have to skim read a fair bit, but yeah, I did overall enjoy it. I am hanging on to this, not just for the beautiful cover, but for the fact that there are still random books out there that no one's ever heard of. Not one single person on Goodreads has reviewed this, and which you can come across sitting on a shelf. I kind of like that about the randomness of secondhand. On the incredible off chance that someone watching this has actually read The Claw or has ever heard of Terence Haile, I would love to hear from other people. I feel like right now I'm probably one of 3 people in the whole world who has read this book. I'm sure there's more out there, but whoever left this on the secondhand bookshelf for a start, yeah, let me know. Or if you don't know this one, I'm sure any convicted secondhand science fiction reader has come across a few of these strange, pathetic, flotsam on the beach of literature type books. Tell me what your flotsam was. I'm curious to see if I've read any of them. And in the meantime, if you can't read good books, read bad books that make you smile.